Day 6, July 21st, 1861. Defeat, Washington, D.C. In the telegraph office of the War Department building, just a few steps across the White House lawn from Lincoln's office, the telegraph operators keep their hands hard over their earpieces to block out the noise of the men crowding the room. Lincoln's staff and Army officers have maps spread out on tables and are trying to picture the movements of the troops as they are being reported over the wires. The dispatches are from a field telegraph office a few miles from the fighting. In the first true battle of the war, fresh Union volunteers and equally inexperienced Confederate soldiers are on a battlefield about 30 miles southwest of Washington near Manassas, Virginia. So far, the news coming to the War Department is very good. The mood of the day, described by one observer as feverish excitement and little, if any, alarm, is becoming more relaxed. No one is ready to celebrate yet, but there's a feeling of confidence on the part of Lincoln and his staff that the many predictions of a quick Union victory and an end to the Southern Rebellion will prove true today. The whole North arose. It has been 3 months since South Carolina attacked Fort Sumter. The country looks nothing like it did when Lincoln took office a little bit before then. Immediately after the fall of Fort Sumter, Lincoln telegraphed the governors of all the states asking for volunteers to join the army and put down the rebellion. That was a moment of decision for most of the states of the Union. Beriah Magoffin, governor of Kentucky, replied to Lincoln, "I say emphatically, Kentucky will furnish no troops for the wicked purpose of subduing her sister Southern states." John W. Ellis, governor of North Carolina, wrote, "I regard the levy of troops made by the administration for the purpose of subjugating the states of the South as in violation of the Constitution and the gross usurpation of power. I can be no party to the wicked violation of the laws of the country and to this war upon the liberties of the free people. You can get no troops from North Carolina." The governor of Tennessee, Isham G. Harris, wrote, "Tennessee will not furnish a single man for the purpose of concord should, but 50,000 if necessary for the defense of our rights and those of our Southern brethren." Claiborne Fox Jackson, governor of Missouri, wrote, "Your requisition, in my judgment, is illegal, unconstitutional, and revolutionary in its object, inhumane and diabolical, and cannot be complied with. Not one man will the state of Missouri furnish to carry on any such unholy crusade." Instead, these governors offered troops to the Confederate army. Lincoln was disappointed but not surprised. In the North, however, the response was just as strong as the support of the Union. First came shock. In the North, the threat of the attack on Fort Sumter had considered the idle buster of angry disappointment. As one Boston eyewitness put it, "The fort's surrender fell on the land like a thunderbolt." But in response to Lincoln's request for volunteers, the whole North arose as one man. What Lincoln needed most urgently was protection for Washington, D.C. The nation's capital sits right on the borders of Virginia and Maryland, two dangerous states at the time. Virginia, which seceded just 2 days after Lincoln asked for troops, was one of the most powerful states in the Confederacy. Maryland, also a slave state, had not yet seceded, but its sympathies were with the Confederacy. When the first Northern troops headed for Washington reached Baltimore, Maryland, about 40 miles north of their destination, a mob attacked them. The mayor of Baltimore told Lincoln, "It is not possible for more soldiers to pass through Baltimore unless they fight their way at every step." The troops had to get off their trains and march a different route to Washington. Lincoln, like every other Union supporter in the city, had to wait anxiously for several days, during which the capital was open to invasion from nearby rebel soldiers in Virginia. Rebel sympathizers in Maryland had cut the telegraph lines to the capital and blocked the railways, so the city was truly on its own. Fortunately, the Union troops arrived before any attack was attempted. But that first crisis was soon replaced with others. Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina joined the rebellion. On the day of this first battle, 11 former Union states now call themselves the Confederate States of America. The country is truly divided. The Fast and the Furious. As each state seceded, many of the soldiers and sailors from those states switched their allegiance to the South. These included most important officers. Lincoln had to reorganize the Union's army and navy before the rebellion could be stopped. The 75,000 volunteers who joined the cause after Lincoln's request for troops had signed up for just 100 days. Some officers felt that was barely enough time to train the new recruits, but other aides, as well as influential journalists, shared the public's general opinion that a swift, overwhelming action by the North would lead to an immediate victory. The self-puffery that had led the South to attack Fort Sumter was present in the North too. Overconfidence and wishful thinking about a single decisive battle are common mistakes in warfare. Lincoln gave his commanders as much time as he could, but it was impossible to ignore the 100-day deadline after which his soldiers would return home. Shortly before the deadline, he ordered his generals to bring the fight to the rebels in Virginia. No picnic. Leading up to the battle, confidence in the North was so high that journalists and citizens made plans for picnics near the front to watch the fighting. Now that the battle has begun, the reporters telegraphed back to the War Department in Washington every 15 minutes, confirm that Union troops are advancing easily. The field officers say the battle is essentially over. Then something goes wrong. A confusing telegram arrives from an army captain. The day is lost. The routed troops will not reform. The message warns that Washington is in danger. No one can find Lincoln. After the positive early dispatches, he had gone for an evening drive. Meanwhile, more messages are arriving that confirm a sudden turn of events. As soon as the Union troops completed their advance toward the Confederate positions, the Confederates began a counterattack. Under the photo, the chaos begins at Bull Run. The American flag is on the ground and the Union soldier near its running away from the battle. Lincoln gets news when he returns to the White House. He walks calmly but quickly to the telegraph office. Everyone is staring so closely at maps of the battlefield that at first they don't notice he has arrived. Soon more reports come over the wire. Facing the Confederate cannons and tough resistance from the Confederate troops, the Union soldiers have turned and run. The men in the room look to Lincoln for a reaction. His expression is grim, but he's not frightened. Many people are less steadfast. The poet Walt Whitman later wrote, "In Washington, among the great persons and their entourage, there is a mixture of awful consternation, uncertainty, rage, shame, helplessness, and stupefying disappointment. The worst is not only imminent, but already here." All night, Lincoln receives visitors at the White House who witness the scene. He learns that the road along which the Union troops made their orderly advance became chaotic. Troops threw their heavy equipment off to the side so they could retreat more quickly. Drivers of equipment wagons, finding that their horses couldn't make it through the mob on the road, simply abandoned their wagons and horses and joined the soldiers retreating on foot. Cannons, ammunition, thousands of rifles, and other equipment littered the battlefield and the roadside. Similar reports spread panic throughout Washington. Whitman would say that the talk among certain of the magnates and officers and clerks and officials everywhere was loud and undisguised for yielding out and out, and substituting the Southern rule, and Lincoln promptly abdicating and departing. Lincoln doesn't waver. Through the night, he makes further plans for the army based on what he has learned from this battle. If there were nothing else of Abraham Lincoln for history to stamp him with, Whitman concluded, it is enough that he endured that hour, that day, indeed a crucifixion day, that it did not conquer him, that he unflinchingly stemmed it and resolved to lift himself and the Union out of it. The battle had proved that the two sides were equally matched in many ways. They had similar weapons, similar training, and similar familiarity with the terrain. On any given day, either might win. That meant this war would be decided by the ability to take a blow and still move forward. In regard, as William T. Sherman had written to his friend around the time of the attack on Fort Sumter, the North had all the advantages: more men, more factories to produce weapons, and a government with more money to support the war effort. The idea that a swift attack would break the other side's will to fight was as foolish on this day as it had been when Fort Sumter was taken. The bloodiest war in history has now formally begun. In the photo, as left is Simon Cameron, Lincoln's first Secretary of War. He had been promised a cabinet position by Lincoln's aides in return for staying out of the convention battle that led to Lincoln's nomination. Unfortunately, he was deeply corrupt and not a competent manager of the War Department. He was forced to resign in 1862. Lincoln then gave the post to one of Cameron's chief aides, Edwin Stanton Wright. Stanton, who had been Attorney General during the pro-slavery presidency of James Buchanan, seemed an odd choice at first, but his commitment to the preservation of the Union and his effectiveness as a manager was unquestionable. He and Lincoln had very different styles. Stanton had almost no sense of humor, while Lincoln interrupted the most serious discussions if a joke came to mind. Yet they grew to have a great respect for each other. In time, Stanton also came to share many of Lincoln's political views.